Normally when I make these videos, I have sort of a goal of informing people of a new fact or a new idea that they may have not known before, like with the critical race theory video or the Vietnam video. I wasn't trying to enforce my opinions. I was just trying to bring light new things that most of the time are not discussed when discussing these ideas. Particularly if we talk about the Vietnam War, we don't talk about it as the complete and utter destruction of Indochina. We usually talk about it in a way of it was America's great mistake and we retreated and lost the war. We rarely talk about the loss of life there. The loss of life is something that bothers me greatly, especially when it comes to children. And on that note, the first topic we're going to discuss in this video is the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict, or what can be blatantly said at this point, the genocide of Palestinians on the Gaza Strip. Over the last week, 7 different Palestinians, 5 of whom were babies, froze to death because of the lack of shelter and humanitarian aid in Gaza. Israeli forces entered a hospital, evacuated all of the patients, kidnapped the head doctor of that hospital, and then torched the hospital and burnt it to the ground. These are not new things. We've been watching Israel bomb hospitals and kill civilians this entire time, and the world is just sitting by and watching it happen and not doing anything. There's a few exceptions. Ireland has voiced support for the Palestinians. Spain is now saying they're not going to agree to send arms there anymore. Of course, there's the local support from Lebanon and other places. But there's really so much more that could be done, particularly here in the United States, where we're just sitting by and letting this happen. I've seen a lot of questions about what Joe Biden's legacy is going to be. And the main one that I can honestly say when I think of Joe Biden's administration and his presidency, it's not going to be the inflation, and it's not going to be the how worse things in the United States have gone by while his administration just did nothing. It is going to be how they not only supported but encouraged the Israeli genocide of Palestinians on the Gaza Strip since October 8th. The New York Times is one of the most important news sources in the entire world. It could probably be argued that it is the most important news source in the entire world because that is where the United States distributes its information from, the New York Times and other news sources. I've been seeing a lot of different posts on there regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict and different things. One of the ones that I saw in the last few weeks was an article written by somebody discussing the looting by gangs and why humanitarian aid is a struggle in the Gaza Strip because gangs are currently looting and taking all of this from actual people. Since October of 2024, only 12 humanitarian aid trucks with food and other resources have made it into Gaza because they are restricted by Israel. We can discuss a bunch of other things with this topic, but that is one that really sent me over the edge. We're going to discuss the New York Times a few other times in this video when we get to the end topic, but that is one. A lot of other arguments that I've seen pro-Israeli side have been things, a lot of what is known as whataboutism. What about what's going on in Ukraine? What about how we talk about disproportionality when it comes to response? And I listened to this podcast, I've mentioned it before, and there's a lot of conservative pundits and right-wing people who come on there, and I think it's very important to listen to people who don't have the same opinions of you so that you know how to debate them and point out flaws in their logic. And a lot of these things, particularly with October 7th, there's a lot of myths and a lot of things that have come out that we now know is false about what happened that tragic and terrible day. And the same thing is happening within the Gaza Strip. There's a lot of things that are being said that just are not true. Israel has provided no evidence that there are Hamas fighters or anyone underneath the people they are bombing. In fact, you can argue that there is evidence that it's not that way, since Israel tells people to go to a quote-unquote safe zone and then immediately drops bombs on that safe zone or their troops fire upon them, and murder them. We saw this at the beginning of this conflict earlier this year when the Israeli forces opened fire on an aid truck. We've seen them kill journalists this last few days. 5 journalists were killed in a van that was called press. I guess you could technically argue they're not supposed to be there in the first place, since no journalists or humanitarian aids are really supported. Especially journalists are now officially illegal. The Al Jazeera offices have been closed in both the Gaza Strip and in Israel. People who report from there about what's going on are under extreme scrutiny. But this is nothing compared to what really bothers me, and that is the amount of children who have been dying without any cause other than there's just a country out there who wants more land, and so they are killing people indiscriminately, which that's not even really true, as I'll discuss here in a moment, but they are just murdering people and have no end in sight to what is going to happen with these over 2 million people who now no longer have a home in northern Gaza, won't really have a home in southern Gaza, and don't really have anywhere else to go. I was watching this video of these people who I used to really like when I was younger, and they were discussing this in a sympathetic way that I am sympathetic to. And one of the things that it really drew me to, that I've heard this comparison for from numerous people like Richard Wolff and Chomsky and Finkelstein and other people, is the eradication of the indigenous people of North America. We talk about that. It's something that we are well aware of, and we all know it. We know that the Founding Fathers knew well what they were doing to those people. We know that what was going on was terrible and that it just happened. We all know about Manifest Destiny. We all know about the horrors the Native Americans had to go through at the hands of us, of our ancestors who came here, of the United States, the people who live there. We cannot change that anymore. We can advocate for better treatment of Native Americans on the reservations within the general aspect of how we treat minorities in this country, but we cannot go back and replace the millions of people, and women, children, men, all of them who we ruthlessly murdered just because we wanted to take their land for its resources and to expand the capitalist agenda. We are now living in an age where we are seeing this in real time. Every day we wake up and you can go on any news, real news outside of the United States, because it's hard to find it within the United States media. And you can read how many people were killed in Gaza today. You can read how many babies froze to death today because they have nowhere to go. How many of them suffocated? How many of the premature babies were endangered of dying because the hospital and electricity has been shut off? What sewage pump has been just bombed? What water supply has been cut off? How many humanitarian aid trucks are being brought in and restricted? How many bombs have been dropped? Or, and my final point that I would like to talk about when it comes to discriminate killing, because we know these are targeted attacks, and here's how we know. On October 9th, 2024, in the opinion column of the New York Times, posted with proof of x-rays that had to be posted because people were saying this was fake. But the truth is, this is very, very real. 65 doctors, nurses, and paramedics. What we saw in Gaza. It's mainly written by a Dr. Sidwa, who has done other interviews all over the internet. You can find them, some on Democracy Now!, some others on different channels. This is just the first opening to it, and that's all I'm going to read, and then I'll discuss my thoughts. I worked as a trauma surgeon in Gaza from March 25th to April 8th. I volunteered in Ukraine and Haiti, and I grew up in Flint, Michigan. I've seen violence and worked in conflict zones. But of the many things that stood out about working in a hospital in Gaza, one got to me. Nearly every day I was there, I saw a new young child who had been shot in the head or the chest, virtually all of whom went on to die, 13 in total. At the time, I assumed this had to be the work of a particularly sadistic soldier located nearby. But after returning home, I met an emergency medicine physician who had worked in a different hospital in Gaza 2 months before me. Quote, I couldn't believe the number of kids I saw shot in the head. Quote, I told him. To my surprise, he responded, "Yeah, me too. Every single day." Anyone who has any understanding of military training, law enforcement training, or just self-defense training when it comes to firearms knows that you are trained if you're going to pull a gun on a person who is threatening you. You shoot them in the head or chest to kill them. These are children. Dr. Sidwa says he said 13. Others have reported more. We know that at least 17,000 children, women and children, have died in Gaza because of bombardment and this kind of thing. We know that over half of the people in Gaza, over the 2 million people in Gaza, over half of those are children who are suffering because of this. Shot in the head and the chest and murdered. Not indiscriminate bombing. Not brought in and said they died from shrapnel because they were trying to bomb the Hamas terrorists who were living under the tunnels of the city. No. Shot in the head and the chest. I'll link this article in the description. There have been responses to it. I don't know how to even begin to respond to people who were trying to defend this at this point. I don't know how to respond to people who are trying to still say that what is happening in Gaza is an accurate response to what happened on October 7th, which was a response to over 40 years of horrible treatment. And that does not justify it, but at the same time, if we're using those arguments of what is a justified response, then what is a justified response to being blockaded and captured into a place where you're on a starvation diet, where the UN has regularly ruled against the treatment that you are doing, that you are suffering in your place? Once again, what happened on October 7th was terrible and unjustifiable. But what is happening right now in Palestine is among the most abhorrent and terrible things we will ever see in our lifetime. And you can do something about it, just like I can do something about it. You can contact your representatives. You can go to protest. You can donate to organizations that are working to stop the arms that are being flown to Israel from the United States. Because as I've said before, the only way Israel can do this is because the United States says so and encourages it. As always, and I'll mention this again at the end of the video, the first link in the description is going to be for the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Please click that link and check out all the different things you can do that I'll go over at the end of this video. I'm going to take just a brief moment to kind of bring some levity to this situation as best I think I can. One of the things I would like you to do if you're watching this video and you don't have as much education as I do, or you do have as much education as I do, you just have it in a different field that doesn't focus so much on the policy or world politics of things, I want you to think about if you know what the international organization BRICS is. And if you do, I would love for you to comment in the comment section, or if you're a friend of mine who watches this video, please reach out to me and tell me what your understanding of BRICS is. I would also just like to point out for a moment that I think it's really weird that we have historians in this country, the United States, and afar, particularly young men who are really interested in things, but never interested in anything other than the war aspect of the entire world. And if it's not the war aspect, it's the sexual aspect of things. It's the, isn't this a really weird and gross and funny and taboo story that we know about? But we never discuss the things that are actually breathtaking or life-taking. Things that we don't ever really talk about. Things like the Allied intervention in the Russian Revolution. Stuff like that. Or the United States and the United States occupation of Haiti from 1915 to 1935. These are things that we don't talk about and we don't discuss out in public. In fact, much like COINTELPRO, these things are relatively unknown, just like the United States intervention, or how the United States got the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon and the Haitian Revolution. We don't discuss these things. We don't discuss Smedley Butler, who was a at the time of his death, the most decorated United States Marine in the history of the United States, who was anti-war, pacifist, and spent the remainder of his life speaking out against war as a racket for big business and capitalist interest, which there's enough evidence of that. I'll do a video on the Russian-Ukraine conflict in the next coming weeks, and I'll discuss that then too. But one thing we don't discuss with Smedley Butler is that he was approached by wealthy interest, and this is his words, and Congress found it to be accurate and likely to have happened, that the wealthy business interest, upon the election of FDR, thought that FDR was going to ring in a communist or socialist government that was going to ruin the capitalist world they live in. So they approached Smedley in hopes that he, along with 15,000 veterans, would take over the United States in a coup, and that Smedley would be their leader, kind of their puppet. No one ever discusses this. There's a whole Wikipedia page that I'll put in the link in the description, but feel free to go there. The last thing we're going to discuss today is the assassination of Brian Thompson by the man who I will not name. Just like we should not name the people who perpetuate school shootings, we should not name the people who perpetuate violence in any sense. You know his name already. You've seen the memes, whatever his story. There's a few things I want to discuss when discussing this. The first one I want to get out of my system is the idea that violence is the only way for any sort of revolution. And there's a lot of people who are thinking like that today. And there's a lot of people my age who are discussing this as a realistic approach. History has over a dozen examples of violence as a revolutionary tactic that left the middle and working class worse off than before. This includes nations that had a revolution of violence that then had outer interventions from other countries coming in trying to stifle that revolution, such as the Russian Revolution. And this includes other nations that did not have that sort of interference, like the French Revolution or otherwise. 2 weeks ago, I did a video where I discussed a litany of examples of peaceful tactics that, amongst other things, got us the 40-hour work week, got us benefits. In Europe, it has got people and workers much more. In other nations, same. Civil disobedience doesn't go back to Gandhi, where the term was first coined. In fact, you can find examples of it going all the way back to the Roman Empire, when people wanted to have political changes that more fit with their ideals. The only thing violence has ever gotten is more violence. Now, on to the assassination of Brian Thompson. Brian Thompson was assassinated as the healthcare CEO, and there were a few things that happened in response to this that I will discuss. One of the things that was discussed was the outpouring of, I will not say support, because the majority of things I saw were not support for the actual murder, but more of a, yeah, this is how angry we are for the terrible healthcare system we have in the United States. I recently saw a 9-year-old debate between Richard Wolff and a Fox News correspondent whose name escapes me at this point, where the Fox News correspondent said that a single-payer healthcare system would cost Americans $34 trillion, which would still save them $8 trillion of what they're paying right now. The healthcare system in the United States is a disaster. Everyone who lives here, everyone who doesn't live here, anybody who is in any way an actual real human being knows this. And so it makes sense that when Brian Thompson was assassinated, that there was not a whole lot of sympathy. In fact, the main thing that I read over and over again were just people giving examples of how insurance companies hurt them, or how they were denying coverage, or how, 1 million people every single year in the United States are going to go bankrupt because of a medical situation that they cannot afford. This is not a problem in other industrialized nations. This is not a problem in other nations that do not fit within the global West. This is only a problem here, in our place where healthcare has been privatized and the greedy people at top such as CEOs like Brian Thompson, take advantage of the situation. This was seen in the case of the insurance company, Anthem, saying that they're going to say how much anesthesia you really need. This was publicized, and people already were very angry about it. The assassination happens, and people find out about it even more, and it thankfully got overturned. But how long is that going to stand? It's joked about in Family Guy and sitcoms and other places. You can see all sorts of stories on the internet of people talking about how they had to have GoFundMes or other ways of making money, or people who were working through chemotherapy up until the day they died because they could not afford the treatment that they needed in order to continue living. This is why it is totally understandable that there was not a whole lot of sympathy for the assassination of this man. However, that being said, his assassination was not okay. Killing Brian Thompson is not going to change anything in the future. Killing congressmen and killing presidents and killing governors and killing statesmen is not going to change anything in the future. We are living in an age unlike any other age, where the people at the very top, your Elon Musk, your Jeff Bezos, the Waltons, the Johnsons, the Mars, the Rothschilds, and the Buffetts, and so many more who sit at the very top 1%, are so rich that you cannot touch them. Getting to Brian Johnson was a total fluke, and quite frankly, it was because he is not someone who was at the peak. Just for instance, if January 6th had been successful and Donald Trump had his coup of the government, as is alleged, and there's enough evidence to show that that's really kind of what he wanted to do, the wealthiest people in this place would have taken over happily in a fascist state. If there is a revolution of violence where people who think like me, who are more left-leaning and more socialist or Marxist or communist or whatever label you want to put on me, if we were to have our revolution and we were to take control of the state, as was the goal in the Russian Revolution, as was the goal in the Chinese Revolution, as has been so other many places like Cuba, and we can go on, people would still not be able to handle the way everything is owned and managed by the top 1% who have enough money, who have enough wealth to where they can still control things through that monetary value. They're still going to be here after the revolution, after the big economic crash that's coming, after the next world war, after every single example of revolutionary or major world change you can think of, the top 1% are still going to be the top 1%, and they are still going to control everything because they control the means of production. The only way you are going to change anything in this country is by disrupting the societal system as it stands and disrupting the systems of production that we have. This means unionizing at Walmart. It means unionizing at Sam's Club, Starbucks, Amazon, and so many other different retailer places and factories that we have here that need this. This means advocating for change, such as we do when we talk about contacting your representatives for the Palestinian crisis, and so many other ways you can get through to this. There's enough evidence out there that shows that violent revolution and murdering is not the way. Now, with that being said on the political side, here is the human side. Brian Thompson was a human being. He had a family, he had people who loved him, he had people who cared about him. I'm not the most religious person. I have very religious friends. I have friends who are anti-religion. I have people in between. A lot of them have been expressing values that, to me, are worrisome because it takes away the humanity of this person. Just because he is the CEO of a place that has taking advantage of an unjust system does not mean he deserves to die. That is not okay. He is still a human being who is worthy of respect. Now, if you want to talk about getting rid of the unjust systems that allowed him to take advantage of the sick and the poor and the weak in our society, absolutely. If you want to not have a lot of sympathy for it, if you want to say, well, this is what happens whenever you take advantage of people and people get angry because they have no other place to turn, which the assassination of him, his killer, definitely had other places he could have gone to. But because of this immature and unrealistic idea, we have people who think that we just need to skip straight to the bloodshed. And that is not the way to go. Now back to my final note. Once again, just because I want to completely incinerate the New York Times and other media in the United States that call themselves news sources, my favorite one was an op-ed column. Once again, just an opinion column. It's not actually the New York Times that distributes news, but it was an op-ed column that discussed how the killer of Brian Thompson was not the folk hero, but Brian Thompson was. The killer, Brian Thompson, was not a folk hero. He is not a hero in any sense of the word. Absolutely not. Heroes do not do what he did. Heroes are patient, heroes organize, heroes find ways to solve problems, not ways to just get a quick fix that doesn't exist. On the counter to that, Brian Thompson was not a folk hero either. He was not a hero of the people. He was working for a place at the very top of that place that exploited and took advantage of a system that is destroying the lives of people every single day. Over 60% of Americans are one major health emergency away from declaring bankruptcy. Not to mention the other things that we have with that. How many people die because they can't get health care in this country? Our infant mortality rate, which is of the third world. There are no heroes in this story. It is just a sad story that no one should be celebrating. And I am happy that it once again brought us all together to unify and acknowledge the terrible things that are happening. But until we accept that civil disobedience and unifying as people and working together to peacefully change and overcome the problems in this country, like healthcare, like the education system, like the systematic injustice that faces people of color and other minorities and the impoverished in this country, we are never going to see real change happen. Now, as a final note, I just once again would like to say the first link in the description is for the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. There are a number of different things you can do on that website, but here are the top 3 in my mind. One of the ones you can do is find organizations in your area that are working to change at the state level, at the federal level, and organizing protest, contacting representatives as a group, and doing a lot of good work to try to stop the ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip. The second thing you can do that I really like is you can find a list of your representatives in your area on there and get a list of different things that are ongoing that you can contact them about and try to stop. This also applies to worldwide. Recently, there was a massive push to punish Spain for not wanting to send arms to Israel anymore, and you could have submitted a public comment showing your support for Spain's autonomy to make its own decisions when addressing these issues. Thirdly, there is legislation coming through all the time about sending arms to Israel, about supporting the ethnic cleansing that is happening there, and other things that are going on. The United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights will generate emails for you to send to your representatives with their contact information. At the same time, if you would like to make your own personal email, they have your representatives that will copy and paste there, and you can just send them through yourself without having to go to their websites or trying to reach them. In my state, one of our senators would not talk to us whenever we tried to reach him, phone call him, and it's quite frankly sad, but most places it's not like that. Most people will at least give you the time of day. Please click on that link, support the issues, contact your representatives. This video and these videos will probably be the longer ones of my series on here, but we will see how it goes. Before his death this last weekend, I had already planned this video, and I'm not going to stop doing it just because he died. But the next video I will do, we will be talking about the humanitarian, neoliberal Jesus president, Jimmy Carter, and all of the things he did to damage both the domestic world of the United States and harm people overseas with his foreign policy as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.